Hi Quilty friends, it's Belle from Seam Sew Me, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful double sawtooth star block. This is a really fun block to make, and what's super fun is that you have basically 3 inches in here in the middle if you want to do some fun fussy cutting. So let's get started to learn how to make this block. So to make your double sawtooth star, I find it helpful to label my pieces of fabric. So I actually have alphabet clips that I use, and then these are some old clips that I had for another pattern that I had made. It can be really helpful so you don't get things messed up since it's 2 sawtooth stars together. So what you'll need is your background fabric. So this is my background fabric, and this will be all along the outside of the larger part, the external part of the sawtooth star. You also need your center. So this will be the center of the internal sawtooth star. You'll need your A fabrics. So you'll have your 8 by 8 inch that will be the points on the outer sawtooth star. And then your other block that is 5 by 5. And these will be the points on your inner sawtooth star. And then lastly, you'll need your B fabric. And your B fabric will actually be really the background area that separates the 2 sawtooth stars. And so these are the fabrics that I will be using for that. So once you have those cut and organized and labeled, let's talk about how to construct the internal block first. So to construct your internal sawtooth star, you're going to take your 5-inch square of your A fabric and your 5-inch square of your B fabric. And you're going to set one on top of the other. And if you have a lighter piece of fabric, it's best to actually put the lighter piece on the top so that you'll be able to see the line whenever you draw the diagonal. So you'll set those on top of one another, right sides together, and then you're going to draw 2 diagonal lines on the back of the lighter square and pin in place. And I'm using a sew line pencil, and this actually comes in a couple of different colors. And so what I actually like to do is I like to draw a line down the middle first of mine. And then I'll go over a 1/4 inch and draw my second one. And then do that again for the other side. I also have diagonal seam tape, and oftentimes I will just use that. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do it for drawing your actual lines. Okay. So I don't know if you can see those lines there or not. I'll hold that up a little closer. But there is my center line, and then there's these 2 on this side that are a 1/4 inch from that middle line there. And then you're going to take a pin, and just pin those in place so that you can keep them together. I starched these really nicely because we are sewing on the diagonal, on the bias there, and so that can keep that from moving. And so what you'll do is you'll sew a 1/4 inch away from the center. So you'll sew on this line, and then you'll flip it around, take it to your sewing machine, and you'll also sew on this line on the other side. So I've sewn the first diagonal there on either side of the diagonal. Now you could have gone ahead and marked the second diagonal, but I like to go ahead and do it once, and then I'll take my pin out and go press it. And then you're going to actually do the same thing. You're going to draw a line right down the center, and then a line a 1/4 inch away from the center on this side, and then a 1/4 inch away from the center on that side. So I'm actually going to take this to my pressing mat. I'm going to press it flat, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. So now that I've drawn a line on both of the diagonals and actually sewn a 1/4 inch from each side of the diagonal, it looks like this. And you're going to take your rotary cutter, and this can be really helpful if you have a rotary mat that spins, so that you're able to actually turn this when you cut this on the vertical and on the horizontal. So what you'll do is you'll cut vertically first. And actually, I think I'm going to line that up on the cutting mat too, which is nice. It's got these extra lines on there. So we will cut here on the diagonal. And then gently lift up your ruler and spin your mat, and then you're going to cut on the other diagonal. Now, if you don't have a cutting mat that spins, you'll just want to be extra careful so that your pieces stay in place. So we're going to cut on this diagonal like so, and then we are going to cut horizontally through the center. Let's see, I'll do vertical first actually. It doesn't matter what you do first, vertical or horizontal, but you're going to go through the center. Again, being careful not to move your fabric. And this is called 8 at a time HSTs. And those move just slightly. We'll kind of put it back there. And then we'll cut one more time vertically. And there we have 8 HSTs. So now you'll take your HSTs to your pressing mat, and you're going to press these open like this, and you'll trim off your dog ears so that you're left with 2-inch half square triangles. Now be gentle when you're doing this so that these are not warped, because otherwise you might be off a little bit when you construct your internal block. So now that you have these pressed and starched where they're really stiff and flat, that way they're a lot easier to work with, you're actually going to trim up your HSTs to make sure that they are 2 by 2. And I like to use my block lock ruler because there is a little groove here on the back that actually locks in place along your seam. And so I will just put that here. You may have a different way that you like to trim your HSTs, but this is how I tend to do mine. And I will just trim along each side to make sure that it's 2 inches. And it is. So I'll just trim off that little dog ear. And we have a 2 by 2 HST. And so I'm going to do that with all of these and make sure that we've got all 8 of them trimmed up, and we'll be ready to assemble the inner sawtooth star. So the fun part now is actually assembling all of our pieces here to make the internal sawtooth star. I like to start with my middle, so this is your center piece. It's 3.5 by 3.5, and then work my way around it. I have a little bit of dyslexia, so it takes me a minute sometimes to get all of my points lined up, my HSTs. So you're going to take your other B fabric, and you have 4 of those. These are 2 by 2s, and those go in the corner. And then you'll arrange your HSTs to where you actually have your sawtooth star, like this. And I suggest that you leave it laid out like this to be able to sew it together, because it can easily be twisted around and you can kind of get a little mixed up. I do sometimes. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this row and sew all of those together at your sewing machine. Then you're going to sew this to this HST and this one to this HST. And then you're going to sew this whole row together as well. So now that we have our rows, the top and bottom sewn together, as well as the sides, what you're going to do now is you're going to sew these 2 pieces to the side of your internal block here. And then once that is sewn together, you'll sew your top to your internal piece here, and then your bottom to your internal piece there. So here's the internal piece. And this is where you're going to want to line up your seams, put your seams up really good here. And they're just going to butt up to one another right like that. And so you'll line it up on both sides. And I actually pressed the wrong way on this one. But you'll also line it up there, and you'll pin and then sew this to the top, and you'll do the same thing for the bottom, line up those seams and sew that as well. So now we're going to repeat the same process for the external sawtooth star. So what you have left is you're going to have your other A fabric, which is 8 by 8, and then you have your background fabric, which is 8 by 8. You also have your 3.5 inch background squares, and these will be used once we assemble the external block, using this as the centerpiece that we just created. So what you're going to do again is lay your blocks right sides together and use the lighter piece of fabric if you can. If you have to use a dark, then I would suggest using maybe a white chalk pen, but something so you can see, because it depends on the back of the color of the fabric, but I tend to like to put the light color fabric on top. And then you will do exactly like you did before. I like to draw a line down the diagonal to show where my center is. And actually, a little tip, sometimes I forget to do it, is if you start in the middle of your block and you draw out this way, your fabric won't bunch up. Sometimes I forget to do that. And then you will measure over 1/4 inch. And then you will do the same thing. You'll draw a line, and you're going to use that line actually to sew on. I didn't use my rotating cutting mat, but if you have that, that can be helpful so your pieces don't move. And you'll do the same thing. You'll draw another line 1/4 inch from that center line. Now you have the option, if you want to right now, when I showed you before, I went ahead and took mine to my sewing machine and I went ahead and sewed the 1/4 inch on each side. Then I came back and did the diagonal and did it on the other. It's up to you how you do that. If you want to shift this and draw both lines at the same time and then sew it all at once, you can do that. It's completely your preference. I did it this way because it actually kind of keeps things in place for me, but it's completely up to you. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew on opposite side of the center line 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to press it, and then I'm going to come back and do the same thing across the other diagonal line. So I have pressed my fabric here after I have sewn on each side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing on this other diagonal. I'm going to draw my center line, and then I'm going to draw 1/4 inch away from that. And I will just spin this around and draw 1/4 inch on the other side. And I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on opposite sides of that center line. So I have taken this to my pressing mat, and I've starched it really good before I cut it. I find that I get better cuts if I do that. So again, we're going to do exactly what we did before, and we're just going to place our ruler there on that center line that we've drawn. I've also got it lined up here on my rotating cutting mat as well. Those lines can be helpful. And then we're just going to cut. Gently lift up the ruler. Oops. My rotating cutting mat kind of moved. And then we're going to cut, get that back in there. And then we're going to cut on this diagonal here. And then we're going to cut vertically down the center. And I use my center here as my guide. And then we'll turn the mat and we'll make one more cut right down the center again. And now again, you have your 8 HSTs, and this is the 8 at a time HSTs. So you're going to take these to your pressing station, and you'll want to press them open. And I use a little more starch again to keep them really firm. And then you'll be trimming these down to 3.5 by 3.5. So take this to your pressing mat, press those, and then trim. Now we're going to trim again just like we did before. I'm going to use my block lock ruler again. This is a larger size. And I will find my 3.5. We're trimming this to make sure it's 3.5. So I'm just going to get these lined up on both sides. And that means I will just have to do 2 cuts, one here, one there, and then just trim off the little dog ear there. And double check, and this measures 3.5. So trim up all 8 of your HSTs to be 3.5 by 3.5, and those are going to go with the other 4 3.5 by 3.5 background pieces of fabric, and then we will assemble our entire block. So now we're going to do the same thing we did before. This is now our center block, which is our internal sawtooth star. And you're going to lay all your pieces out. So you've got 4 3.5 inch squares, and those go on the corner. And then you have your 8 HSTs, and you will lay those out so that you've got your star points all the way around. And you will sew this row together. You'll sew this row together. You'll sew these 2 blocks together right here. And then after that, I'll show you the next steps just in case you forgot how we assembled it before. Okay, so now we have our top row sewn together, our bottom row, and our 2 side pieces. So you're going to take your 2 side pieces, turn those around, and you're going to sew this one to this side, and you'll sew this one to this side. And there you go. You now have a beautiful double sawtooth star block. I'm Belle from Seam Sew Me, and if you enjoyed this tutorial that goes along with the pattern on how to make the double sawtooth star, give this video a like and feel free to subscribe for future tutorials and videos. Until next time, quilty friends, make lovely things.